Hours later, Ethan found himself reviewing the mission details in his dimly lit quarters. A single lamp cast a warm glow on the cold metal walls. Beyond the small porthole window, distant stars winked like ancient secrets. He tapped the holodisk, letting the Admiral's recorded instructions play in hushed tones. The Vaylen artifact known as the Heart of Valis has been rediscovered on an uncharted planet in the Garces Belt, Greaves' voice explained. The planet itself is unremarkable, yet rumored to be rife with gravitational anomalies, dangerous wildlife, and, more alarmingly, a group of renegade raiders with the same objective. Ambassador Selara Va'reth is tasked with retrieving this artifact on behalf of her people, as it holds significant historical and cultural importance. To ensure cooperation between our species, we agreed that a Terran pilot, Ethan Carter, will accompany her. Our intelligence suggests the planet has extremely volatile conditions, requiring an expert's hand. That's you, Captain. The recording paused for a moment. Then Greaves' voice resumed, grim and deliberate. The risks are great. The artifact itself is said to be unstable, with potential energy surges that could devastate the environment. We suspect the raiders aim to weaponize it. Captain Carter, your mission is to protect the ambassador and retrieve the Heart of Valis safely. The Terran alliance stands to gain diplomatic favor from the Vaylen, which could be crucial for future alliances. Ethan closed his eyes, leaning back against the bunk's headrest. The stakes were high, the mission was urgent, and the partner he'd been assigned was, apparently, as proud as she was formidable. He felt a thrill of anticipation. He had piloted through asteroid fields and atmospheric storms, outrun pirates, and negotiated impossible cargo runs. Yet there was something about this mission, about facing the unknown on that planet alongside an alien diplomat who regarded his species as inferior, that stirred him more profoundly than he cared to admit. The next day, Ethan was called for a briefing with Selara in one of the station's secure conference rooms. He entered to find her already seated at a polished black table, flanked by a pair of her Vaylen aides. On the table rested several holographic charts displaying the planet's topography, marked with swirling lines indicating gravitational flux. Selara turned her head to acknowledge him, her horns catching the overhead light. Captain, she said, her tone businesslike. We have begun charting possible landing zones. The planet's northern hemisphere appears to harbor the least volatile weather patterns, though it is still far from safe. Ethan inclined his head. Understood. And the raiders? Her eyes narrowed slightly. Information is scarce, but we suspect they've established a camp near the southwestern region, close to a region thick with chasms, possibly to remain hidden. My concern is that we must not only land safely, but also secure enough time to locate the artifact's resting place before they do. One of her aides, an older Vaylen male named Haurik, spoke up in a low, melodic voice. The artifact is rumored to reside in a temple-like structure built eons ago. The scans show unusual energy readings in that zone. It may have defenses left by an ancient civilization. Ethan studied the holographic map, taking in the swirling lines that indicated gravitational anomalies. This place won't be easy to navigate, he said quietly, letting a bit of admiration slip into his voice. We'll need to make sure we have an exit route that won't get blocked if the gravitational surges worsen. We also need to ensure that our approach is swift and undetected, if possible. Selara inclined her head. I can arrange stealth modules for the ship. Your admiral has granted us partial access to Terran technology as well. Combined, we should be able to slip past detection. The greatest threat remains the environment itself. For a moment, they locked gazes, one assessing, the other calm. Selara's horns pulsed with a faint light, almost imperceptible. Ethan felt a strange tension, not of hostility, but of two strong personalities meeting in the uncertain space between species. He nodded, clearing his throat slightly. Then let's make sure we're prepared for the worst. Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Yes, Captain. I agree. 2 days later, the Terran light cruiser Solaris Dawn eased out of Starbase Orion's docking clamps and glided into the void. Painted a sleek midnight blue, the cruiser bristled with advanced thrusters and sensor arrays, courtesy of the combined Terran-Vaylen outfitting. At the helm, Ethan Carter took a slow breath, letting the familiarity of a ship's cockpit settle his nerves. He ran pre-flight checks with mechanical efficiency. Thrusters, shields, weapons, just in case, hull integrity, life support. Each system responded with a gentle chime. Behind him, Selara stood observing, her slender fingers resting on the back of his chair. She wore a travel outfit that appeared less ceremonial than her official garb, though it retained a certain regal elegance in its deep metallic fabrics. Your handling of the control systems is impressive, Captain, she said with a slight tilt of her horns. I must admit, I have rarely seen a human pilot operate with such confidence. Many of your kind still struggle with advanced cosmic navigation. Ethan gave a half laugh. I grew up on a lunar freight port. Spent more time in zero gravity than with my feet on solid ground. Once I joined the Alliance fleet, I was trained by the best. He paused, then added, You might find humans can learn quickly when we put our minds to something. She regarded him carefully, perhaps catching the note of pride in his voice. Then she nodded once, stepping back as the cruiser began its slow crawl away from the station. Soon the darkness of space engulfed them, a dazzling tapestry of stars shining in every direction. Once clear of the station's control zone, Ethan engaged the warp drive. Space rippled, and the engines roared softly, catapulting the Solaris Dawn into the luminal corridor that stretched toward the Garces belt. Vibrant trails of blue and white streamed past the cockpit windows. Selara and her aides took seats, while Ethan coordinated with the autopilot and occasionally cast a glance at the readings, verifying they remained on course. As they sped through warp space, an uneasy quiet settled in. Selara busied herself with reviewing data on the artifact, quietly conferring with her aides in whispered Vaylen dialect. Ethan, seated alone at the helm, found his curiosity piqued every time he glanced at Selara's face, noticing how her horns would shift in color depending on her mood. He recalled reading that Vaylen horns were semi-biological, capable of reflecting a combination of emotional states and physiological cues. At times, her horns glimmered with cold, steely hues, perhaps when focusing or deep in thought. At others, they took on a subtle amethyst glow, reminiscent of the hush of a library at twilight. Rhea's earlier comment came back to him about how Selara thought humans were inferior. He wondered if that conviction still burned within her, or if interacting with him was chipping away at her preconceived notions. He tried to keep a neutral expression, focusing on the swirling patterns of warp space. At last, the warp drive disengaged, and with a soft lurch, normal space-time enveloped the cruiser once more. Ahead, a distant star glowed with a dull red light, illuminating the Garces belt, a sprawling region of cosmic debris and drifting asteroids. Beyond it, partially eclipsed by a roiling dust cloud, lay the unnamed planet that would be their destination. Scans indicated thick storm clouds swirling over its northern hemisphere, lightning storms dancing across the atmosphere like silver ribbons. It was larger than Earth, with a higher gravity field, and the anomalies were already causing the ship's instruments to fluctuate. Ethan frowned at the readings. We'll need to navigate the asteroid field before we can attempt atmospheric entry. The anomalies may throw off our sensors, so manual piloting might be necessary. He spared a glance at Selara, who had moved to stand by him once more. She studied the readouts, her brow furrowed. My aides and I can assist with scanning frequencies to reduce the interference. But the final flight path is up to you. We must land in a stable zone near the equatorial region to avoid the worst of the storms. He nodded, feeling adrenaline surge in his veins. This was the part he lived for, guiding a ship through dangerous territory, relying on skill, instinct, and the synergy of technology at his fingertips. Strap in, he warned. This could be bumpy. With practiced hands, Ethan guided the Solaris Dawn into the asteroid field. Giant rocks floated in silent formation, some the size of small moons, others no bigger than a starship's hull. One false move could slam them into a fragment of debris and rupture the hull, but Ethan weaved between them with a calm confidence that belied the tension coiled in his muscles. Selara and her aides watched, bracing themselves as the ship dipped and rolled. Occasionally, Ethan would fire short bursts from maneuvering thrusters to avoid an oncoming shard of rock. The cockpit lights flickered each time the instruments hiccuped due to the gravitational oddities emanating from the planet. At one point, they passed a cluster of particularly volatile asteroids. Pockets of luminous gas were trapped in their fissures, sparking with electrical charges. Ethan's knuckles whitened on the controls as he pivoted the cruiser in a graceful arc. The hull creaked under the stress, but they narrowly missed a deadly collision by mere meters. Ethan exhaled sharply. Almost through, he murmured, stealing a glance at Selara. To his surprise, rather than panic or fear, he saw an intensity of focus in her eyes, and perhaps the faintest trace of respect. Her horns gleamed with a subdued light, neither cold nor scornful. At last, they emerged from the asteroid field, battered by stray bits of cosmic dust but otherwise unharmed. Before them loomed the planet, swirling with muted blues, greens, and browns beneath a thick cloak of swirling clouds. The sensors buzzed with fresh data, trying to pinpoint the best angle of entry. Prepare for atmospheric insertion, Ethan announced. Everyone buckle in. The anomalies might cause violent shifts in gravity. Selara and her aides secured themselves in crashed seats. The Solaris Dawn angled downward, dropping toward the upper atmosphere at an accelerated velocity. Within seconds, the ship began to shudder, friction illuminating the forward view with streaks of fiery red. The gravitational anomalies tugged at them unpredictably, one moment pressing them downward, the next seeming to let them float free. Ethan's arms trembled with the effort of keeping the nose level, sweat beading on his brow. Bolts of lightning raced across the swirling clouds. The hull temperature spiked, alarms beeped, and the forward viewport flared bright as they pushed through thick banks of vapor. Selara gripped her armrests, her eyes locked on the windows. Harrick, the older Vaylen aide, recited something under his breath, a prayer or invocation, perhaps. Then, almost as quickly as the turbulence had begun, it subsided. They burst through a final layer of cloud into clearer skies. Below stretched a rugged landscape of soaring cliffs, winding rivers, and dense forests that shimmered with colors foreign to human eyes. The gravitational anomalies manifested in the form of swirling eddies in the air, small distortions that bent the landscape in fleeting mirages. Ethan deftly adjusted the thrusters, stabilizing their descent until, with a soft thump, the Solaris Dawn touched down on a broad plateau of cracked, stony ground. For a moment, no one spoke. The adrenaline that had fueled the descent still coursed through their veins. Then Selara turned to Ethan, her voice steady. "Your piloting is indeed remarkable, Captain. Perhaps I have been hasty in my judgment of human skill." He smiled crookedly, shutting down the engines one by one. "I'm glad we made it. Let's hope the rest of our mission goes just as smoothly." Selara stood, inclining her horns. "Agreed." Moments later, the boarding ramp extended, hissing as the planet's atmosphere mingled with the ship's filtered air. Ethan and Selara stepped onto the ground, flanked by Howrick and another aide named Anil. They wore sealed environment suits with transparent visors, though the suits were designed to adapt to the planet's composition if it proved stable enough for their respective biologies. The plateau stretched around them, edged with towering basalt columns shaped eons ago by unknown geological processes. Stunted vegetation clung to cracks in the stone, sporting vibrant hues that indicated possible photosynthetic adaptations to the planet's dim sunlight. The temperature was mild, but a strange electrical charge tingled in the air, likely a side effect of the gravitational flux. Ethan walked a few steps away from the ship, scanning the horizon with a portable sensor. "So far, the atmosphere is breathable for humans, though not comfortably," he said. "Vaylen physiology might handle it better, given your capacity for adapting to slightly higher gravity and exotic gases." Selara studied the readouts on her own device. "It seems we can walk freely without suits for a limited duration. However, if the gravitational anomalies intensify, the suits will protect our circulatory systems from undue stress." Ethan nodded. "We should keep them on for now." He turned slowly, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. The plateau was not entirely empty. Glimpses of movement in the distance suggested wildlife, possibly large herbivores. Farther off, a swirl of dust indicated the edges of a deep canyon. "We need to establish a perimeter and see if we can detect any sign of the artifact or the raiders." Herrick stepped forward. "Ambassador, the temple structure, based on our scans, lies to the southeast. We should begin our trek soon if we wish to reach it before nightfall. The planetary rotation suggests we have about 9 hours of daylight remaining." Selara nodded firmly. "Agreed." She turned to Ethan, regarding him for a moment. "Captain Carter, I suggest we move as a unit. We do not know what local predators might roam here, and we must avoid attracting raider attention." He offered a wry grin. "After that landing, sticking together sounds like a good plan." They collected their gear, light weapons set to stun, advanced scanning devices, rations, and field medkits. A portable drone was deployed to circle overhead, feeding real-time data about the terrain back to their wrist displays. The whine of the drone's anti-gravity motors blended with the constant thrum that seemed to emanate from the world itself, a haunting undertone that pulsed through the air. As they trekked across the plateau, Ethan found the ground curiously elastic in places, as if the rock were shaped by the planet's swirling energies. Occasionally, a low rumble shook the earth, making them stagger. Each time, Selara and Ethan exchanged glances of concern, but they pressed on. The path led them to a rocky slope, descending gradually into a wide valley filled with bizarre flora, spiraling vines with translucent leaves that glowed faintly when touched by the sunlight. Ethan paused to examine one of these vines, tapping it with a gloved finger. A soft glow pulsed along its length, and it released a faint chiming sound, like a distant wind chime. Selara crouched beside him, her expression revealing a flash of wonder, though she kept her face composed. "I have never encountered plant life quite like this," she murmured. He nodded. "It's beautiful, but let's stay alert. We don't know if it's carnivorous, or if it might release toxins." Gently, he let the vine go, and the chiming ceased, the glow fading into the plant's translucent tissues. They continued onward, forging a path through the valley. Small insectoid creatures the size of a human hand buzzed around, their wings refracting the light in shimmering patterns. For a few moments, the group moved in silence, absorbing the alien beauty of this unknown world. But as they reached the valley's midpoint, Howrick suddenly raised a hand in warning. "I detect movement," he whispered. "Ahead, near that cluster of stone pillars." All eyes turned. In the distance, partially obscured by tall columns of rock, several bipedal shapes moved in a slow, deliberate manner. Through the shifting distortions in the air, it was hard to tell if they were animals or intelligent beings. Ethan tapped his visor, enhancing the zoom. His stomach twisted. They weren't local fauna, they looked like humanoids in ragged armor, brandishing weapons and scanning the surroundings. Raiders. Ethan gestured for the group to duck behind the shelter of a large boulder. "We've got company," he said, keeping his voice low. "And it's not local wildlife." Solara's horns flared with a pulse of color. "Then they have arrived earlier than we anticipated. We must not let them see us, or they could signal their main force." Howrick's brow furrowed. "They seem to be searching, possibly on the same trail we are. We must reach the temple first." Ethan nodded. "Let's see if we can slip past them. If that fails, we may have to engage, but I'd prefer not to stir up trouble unless we have no choice." Selara agreed. "Very well. Let us proceed with caution." Moving with silent care, they skirted the edges of the valley, using the towering pillars and rocky outcroppings as cover. The raiders, perhaps half a dozen in number, remained unaware of their presence, though they seemed agitated, pacing back and forth. A metallic glint on their uniforms suggested stolen or mismatched gear, possibly from multiple species. Ethan felt a surge of protectiveness for his small group, especially Selara, who was clearly the key to retrieving the artifact safely. He kept one hand near his sidearm, ready to act at the first sign of hostility. After a tense half-hour of skirting the area, they managed to circumvent the raiders' patrol line. The path led them uphill again, toward a higher elevation. By the time the group paused to catch their breath, the sun had shifted overhead, casting longer shadows across the alien landscape. They had evaded immediate danger, but Ethan's mind buzzed with unease. If the raiders were already this far into the planet, time was running short. Selara wiped sweat from her brow, the environmental suit's faceplate retracted to allow her cooler air. "That was too close. We must not underestimate them. They will be watching every approach to the temple." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Agreed. We need to find a route that gets us there first, ideally unseen. Let's set up a temporary camp and figure out the best path." They found a small recess in the cliff face, partially hidden by a cluster of spiky, cobalt-colored shrubs. There, they deployed a camouflaged canopy and powered up portable shield generators designed to mask their heat signatures and block out scanning pulses. The group settled into rest, and while Howrick and Anil busied themselves with equipment, Ethan and Selara stood at the edge of the camp, watching the horizon. The sun cast a warm glow across the rugged terrain, and a gentle breeze stirred the alien plants. Despite the lingering tension, Ethan took a moment to appreciate the rare beauty of this world. Turning to Selara, he asked quietly, "How important is this artifact to the Vaylen?" "Enough to risk war with raiders and braving these anomalies." She shifted her stance, gazing out at the horizon. "The Heart of Valis is more than a mere relic. It is intertwined with our history, said to be a symbol of unity and a key to understanding certain advanced technologies from our ancient past. If it fell into the wrong hands, it could be perverted into a weapon. My people would not forgive me if I allowed that." Ethan nodded, sensing the weight of responsibility she carried. "Then we'll do whatever it takes to secure it, Ambassador." She turned, eyes lingering on him for a moment. "I have misjudged humans in the past," she admitted quietly, her voice almost lost to the wind. "But in you, I see a determination that contradicts the stories I've heard of your species' recklessness." He shrugged, a small smile curving his lips. "We can be reckless, sure. But we're also survivors, innovators, and sometimes, we surprise those who underestimate us." Her horns reflected a gentle swirl of color. "Yes," she said softly, "that much is becoming evident." After a brief respite, they gathered around a holographic map they had compiled from the drone scans. The temple seemed to lie another 5 kilometers to the southeast, nestled in a region dotted with rolling hills and occasional canyons. Energy readings spiked in that area, indicating gravitational distortions were particularly strong. Ethan traced a route with his finger. If we skirt around these hills here, we can avoid most direct lines of sight. The raiders might be occupying this canyon pass, which is the most obvious approach. But if we push across this ridge, we might catch them off guard. Selara nodded. Time is of the essence, though. We cannot afford too much caution, or we risk arriving too late. She glanced at her aides. Arik and Neil, prepare to mobilize. We travel light, only essential gear. We leave in 10 minutes. They dismantled the temporary camp, rolling up the canopy and stowing the shield generators in compact form. Soon, they set off once more, moving quickly over uneven ground. Occasionally, the planet reminded them of its volatile nature with sudden tremors or blasts of wind that carried strange mineral scents. Once, they glimpsed a massive creature in the distance, a lumbering quadruped with horn-like structures that crackled with static electricity. It watched them briefly from afar, then vanished into a thicket of iridescent trees. The group pressed on. Despite their suits, fatigue set in. The planet's gravity, slightly stronger than Earth's, wore on Ethan's muscles. Yet Selara seemed tireless, her posture as straight as ever. Perhaps her species had adapted to higher gravity on their homeworld, or perhaps her sense of purpose fueled her stamina. As they crested a rise, the temple finally came into view. It stood amidst broken columns and shards of ancient masonry, half buried in swirling dust. Its architecture was alien, even by Vaylen standards, tall spires rising at crooked angles, carved with symbols that glowed faintly in the thick air. At the center lay a grand entrance, sealed by a heavy door etched with pulsing lines that snaked inward like rivulets of molten metal. Selara inhaled sharply. So it is true, she whispered. The stories did not exaggerate. Ethan felt a chill despite the warmth of the suit. He studied the temple through binoculars. I see at least 2 figures near the entrance. Raiders, armed with some kind of energy rifles. They look uneasy, like they're wary of something inside. Arik nodded grimly. Ancient defenses, perhaps. The temple might not welcome intruders. Enil's voice trembled with excitement. The artifact rests somewhere within, Ambassador. We must proceed carefully. Selara considered the temple, her horns reflecting a swirl of anxious color. We must also handle the Heart of Valis with caution. It is said to be protected by an energy field that can destabilize if tampered with incorrectly. Ethan exhaled. So we not only have to outmaneuver the raiders, but also avoid triggering whatever booby traps might be inside. Yes, Selara said, her jaw set. This is the task we've come for, Captain. He gave a short nod. Then let's see what we're dealing with. We'll need a plan to neutralize those guards. I suggest we approach from the side, using the broken columns for cover, and coordinate a quick stun assault. Once they're down, we'll have to move fast. Selara agreed. Your Terran tactics are direct, but I believe it is our best option given the time. They descended the slope, keeping low. Gusts of wind whipped around them, throwing up clouds of dust. The temple loomed closer, its ancient presence both ominous and compelling. Through the dust, Ethan glimpsed the silhouettes of the 2 guards. His heart pounded, adrenaline sharpening his senses. At a signal from Ethan, the group separated into 2 flanking parties, weaving between crumbled walls and jagged pillars. The raiders had parked a skiff nearby, a small hover vehicle that might serve as an escape route if they noticed intruders. Selara crept behind a section of collapsed roof, while Ethan circled closer to the guards, his stun pistol at the ready. Suddenly, one of the raiders turned. A glint in his visor suggested he'd spotted movement. Ethan cursed under his breath. Now, he hissed. Selara and her aides popped up from cover, firing bursts of stun energy. Ethan squeezed off his own shot, hitting the first guard square in the chest. The second tried to duck, returning fire with a bolt that sizzled past Ethan's head. Howrick's stun blast nailed him seconds later, sending him sprawling onto the dusty ground. In the aftermath, Ethan and Selara darted forward, scanning the area for more threats. The guards lay unconscious, their rifles flickering with residual energy. The entrance to the temple stood before them, silent, mysterious, pulsing with a faint inner glow. Selara crouched next to one of the fallen raiders, checking for signs of life. Alive, she said, exhaling in relief. I prefer not to kill them unless absolutely necessary. Ethan nodded. I agree. Let's leave them secured in that skiff. Howrick, Enil, see if you can tie them up and disable their vehicle. We don't want them giving an alarm. While the aides busied themselves, Ethan and Selara turned to the temple door. Up close, the The carvings glowed with mesmerizing patterns, reminiscent of Vaylen script but far older. Selara ran a hand across the surface, her expression one of awe. "This predates most known eras of Vaylen history," she whispered. "It's as though we stand on the threshold of our own myths." Ethan's gaze roamed over the archaic symbols. He had seen many ruins in his travels, but nothing quite like this. "Any idea how to get inside?" he asked softly. Selara tapped a small device on her wrist. A wave of translucent light washed over the door, scanning for lock mechanisms. Strange energy fluctuations danced across the surface. "It appears to be sealed by a lattice of resonant fields. We may need to harmonize with them somehow. Harik, Enil, once you're done, we'll need your assistance." Within minutes, the aides joined them. Harik produced a slender rod from his pack, which hummed when activated. Carefully, they attuned it to the frequencies emanating from the door, searching for the correct resonance that would unlock it. The door pulsed in response, lines of light zigzagging across the carvings, as though testing the intruders. After some tense moments and a few failed attempts that sent sparks of energy crackling across their suits, the door finally began to move. Heavy and ancient, it slid aside with a groan that echoed in the depths of the temple. A rush of air whooshed out, smelling of dust and stasis. Selara's horns glowed faintly, reflecting her mounting excitement. She looked to Ethan. "Captain, shall we proceed?" He gripped his weapon, eyes scanning the dark corridor beyond. "Lead the way, Ambassador." They stepped inside, each footfall echoing in the chamber. Lights embedded in the walls began to glow, reacting to their presence. Strange inscriptions wound across the floor, and further in, faint outlines of doorways led deeper into the temple. The air felt charged, thick with centuries of undisturbed power. As they ventured forth, Ethan couldn't help but notice how Selara paused at every new symbol, her expression a blend of reverence and anxiety. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll find it," he whispered. She glanced at him, and for once, he thought he saw a genuine warmth in her eyes. "We must," she murmured, "for both our people's sakes." Exploring the temple was like navigating a labyrinth of dreams. Corridors curved and twisted in impossible angles, sometimes leading them in circles. Ancient mechanisms would whir to life at random, illuminating chambers with wavering light. Every so often, the walls would tremble, as though the structure itself were breathing. After nearly an hour of cautious exploration, they discovered a series of large panels that seemed to depict some ancient saga. Selara pointed out details, mighty figures with elongated horns locked in battle, or perhaps uniting in a ritual. The Heart of Valis was represented as a glowing sphere, encircled by spiral glyphs. Haurik's voice was hushed. "Such detail. It's as if they anticipated we would come one day." Enil shivered. "I feel as though we're being watched by ghosts." Ethan took note of a faint hum drifting through the corridor. "Does anyone else hear that?" "It's like a heartbeat, deep in the walls." Selara nodded, pressing a hand to the stone. "The temple resonates with the artifact. We must be close." Her horns glimmered with shifting hues. "Yet I fear it may also have defenses that test our worthiness." No sooner had she spoken than the corridor ahead flared with bright light. A shimmering barrier of energy formed, blocking their path. Runes danced across its surface, unreadable yet pulsing with urgent radiance. Enil, the youngest of the aides, approached cautiously, scanning it with her device. "Ambassador, this barrier is attuned to Vaylen biometrics, but also to some unknown factor. It's almost as though it seeks more than just a genetic key, it seeks permission." Selara frowned. "Permission? From whom?" Haurik's eyes widened. "Perhaps from the ancient guardians. A test of spirit." Ethan weighed his options. "If it's only attuned to Vaylen, I'm guessing I won't be of much help?" Selara hesitated. "Let me try something." She reached out a hand toward the barrier. The moment her palm touched the crackling surface, arcs of light rippled around her fingers. She gasped, but did not pull away. The runes flared, and faint voices, like echoes from centuries past, filled the corridor. Selara's expression contorted, as though experiencing flashes of memory not her own. Ethan reached out, concern etched on his face. "Ambassador? Are you all right?" She trembled slightly, but her eyes remained open, locked on the swirling light. "I can see glimpses of the past, illusions or trials. There's a presence demanding proof that I am worthy, that I come with noble intent." Her voice took on a haunted quality, as though she were speaking both for herself and an echoing host. Then, with a final burst of sparks, the barrier flickered and vanished. Selara staggered back into Ethan's arms, her chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. He steadied her gently. "Easy," he whispered. "What just happened?" She pressed a hand to her temple, her horns shimmering with conflicting colors. I was tested in some manner of telepathic trial. The temple's guardians probed my mind for sincerity. It seems. I passed. Ethan exhaled in relief. Good. Let's keep going. They proceeded, the corridor opening into a vast chamber. The walls soared into arches overhead, decorated with swirling patterns that glowed with an otherworldly light. At the center, a pedestal of black stone rose from the floor. Hovering above it, contained in a shifting field of translucent radiance, was the Heart of Valis. It pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, beating like a distant star. Tendrils of energy curled outward, forming ephemeral patterns in the air. There was a hushed, sacred quality to the space, as though the slightest sound might shatter the fragile hush. Selara stepped forward, reverently, her voice trembling. At last, the Heart of Valis. Halric and Anil bowed their heads. Ethan stood back, awe etched on his features. It's beautiful, he murmured, unable to tear his gaze away from the radiant sphere. Within its shifting depths, faint shapes seemed to appear and vanish, perhaps glimpses of the universe itself, swirling in miniature. Selara took a deep breath, approaching the artifact. She extended her hands, carefully sliding them into the energy field that protected it. The tendrils clung to her fingers, shimmering with an almost affectionate glow. She winced slightly, as though the sphere's power caused her discomfort, but she continued, resolved. But before she could grasp it fully, the entire temple shook violently. Dust rained from the ceiling, and distant explosions echoed through the halls. The artifact's light flickered, and the pedestal's glow intensified, casting ominous shadows across the chamber. Ethan cursed under his breath. That can't be good. Raiders. Halric frowned, checking his device. Yes. I'm picking up multiple heat signatures entering the temple. They must have followed us or found another way in. Selara's horns flashed with anger. We must remove the Heart of Valis quickly. If these raiders disrupt the artifact's energy field, the entire temple could collapse or worse. Anil's voice quavered. The legends say the artifact can unleash catastrophic surges if mishandled. Ethan turned toward the corridor they had come from. Then we make a stand here. Ambassador, retrieve the artifact. We'll hold them off. Selara hesitated, but the urgency in Ethan's voice spurred her to action. She returned her full attention to the sphere. The glowing field resisted lightly, swirling in protest, but her touch grew more confident. Slowly, with deliberate care, she lifted the Heart of Valis from its resting place. It felt weightless, despite the power coursing within. As the orb left the pedestal, a deep hum vibrated through the chamber, and the swirling patterns on the walls began to fade. Halric and Anil positioned themselves by the entrance, weapons ready. Ethan joined them, heart pounding. The rumble of footsteps echoed through the corridor, accompanied by harsh voices. Then the first raider appeared, a hulking figure with a battered breastplate. He snarled, leveling a disruptor rifle. Ethan fired immediately, his stun blast catching the raider in the shoulder. The man stumbled, but others followed. A firefight erupted in the ancient hall, energy bolts ricocheting off the walls. Selara crouched behind the pedestal, protecting the Heart of Valis. Halric and Anil fired in controlled bursts, taking down a few raiders, but more arrived, furious and desperate. The temple trembled again, as though reacting to the conflict within. Sections of the ceiling cracked, sending shards of rock clattering to the floor. An oppressive energy weighed down on them, threatening to buckle the structure. With gritted teeth, Ethan gestured for Halric and Anil to fall back. We can't hold them off forever. He shouted over the din. We need to get out, now. Selara, clutching the orb, nodded. The artifact is destabilizing the temple. The guardians must sense its removal. They retreated deeper into the chamber, looking for an alternate exit. The main corridor was blocked by raiders, and they had to scramble around massive pillars, avoiding falling debris. Suddenly, the floor split open in a seismic quake, revealing a dark tunnel beneath. A rift in the temple's foundation. Ethan peered down, adrenaline pumping. This might lead us out, or bury us alive. We've got no choice. Halric tossed a scanning device into the depths, watching the readings flicker. It slopes downward, then angles back up. It might connect to the outside. Another explosion rocked the chamber, as a raider's stray grenade sent a plume of dust overhead. Selara clutched the heart, its glow flickering in agitation. We must go now. One by one, they jumped into the fissure, sliding down a smooth slope of rock into darkness. The temple raged above them, stones collapsing in a cacophony. Ethan landed hard at the bottom of the slope, rolling to absorb the impact. Selara followed, cradling the artifact. Howrick and Anil brought up the rear. With weapons at the ready, they pushed forward along the dim tunnel, guided only by the faint glow of the orb and their suit lights. Behind them, the temple roared in final collapse, entombing the raiders who had dared challenge the Guardians. Ethan spared a moment of remorse. No treasure was worth so many lives, but survival demanded they press on. The tunnel twisted and branched, leading them through what appeared to be an underground network of passages. Stalactites hung from the ceiling, dripping mineral-rich water that glowed faintly in the artifact's light. Strange crustaceans scuttled in the shadows, chittering softly as they passed. Selara took the lead, her posture regal even in these cramped, eerie surroundings. The orb pulsated in her arms, its color shifting from blue to soft pink, as if reflecting her tension. The artifact's energies are calmer now, she noted. It seems the immediate threat has passed. Ethan walked beside her, scanning the walls with a handheld device. No sign of radiation pockets or lethal gases. That's one mercy. A rumble echoed behind them, dust sifting from the rocks overhead. He winced. We'd better keep moving before the entire passage collapses. Howrick and Anil followed, their suits scratched and dented from the temple's collapse. The group's pace was steady but cautious. Occasionally, they would pause to evaluate a new branch or passage, ensuring they didn't lose themselves in the winding depths. Hours seemed to pass, or perhaps only minutes. Time lost its meaning in that subterranean warren. Yet gradually, the path ascended, and they felt fresher air swirling through cracks in the stone. Spirits lifted at the promise of daylight. At last, they rounded a corner and spotted a faint glow. With renewed vigor, they clambered up a short incline. A rocky archway opened onto the outside world. They emerged onto a ledge halfway up a rugged canyon wall. Far below, a narrow river snaked through the valley, glinting under the planet's pale sun. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, savoring the touch of the breeze on his face. We made it, he breathed. Selara carefully set the Heart of Valis on a stable rock, gazing at its mesmerizing light. Yes, and we have the artifact. She looked at Ethan, her features showing both relief and an undercurrent of gratitude. We owe our lives to your quick thinking, Captain. Thank you. He gave a modest shrug, though a faint flush of pride warmed his cheeks. Couldn't have done it alone, he said. You were the one who convinced the Guardian to let us in. She inclined her horns in acknowledgement. Teamwork, then. Before they could celebrate further, Howrick gave a worried murmur. We should not linger. The temple's collapse might draw more raiders. Anil nodded. Or disrupt the planet's gravitational anomalies further. Ethan rose, scanning the canyon. Our ship is kilometers away, on that plateau we landed on. Can we navigate the canyon to get back to it? Selara consulted her wrist device. We can, but it will be a long journey on foot. The anomalies may have shifted, so the route we took might not be safe. A pang of concern crossed Ethan's face as he gazed at the swirling skies. We've come this far. Let's push on. The sooner we reach the Solaris dawn, the sooner we can secure the artifact properly. Carefully, Selara gathered the Heart of Valis, cradling it like a newborn. The group picked their way down the canyon wall, using natural footholds and ledges. The journey tested both their stamina and their nerves. More than once, a ledge would crumble underfoot, sending rocks clattering into the depths below. Ethan often offered his hand to Selara, helping her maintain balance while she shielded the orb from harm. She accepted his assistance with grace, the tension between them replaced by mutual respect. They reached the canyon floor by late afternoon, forging through a winding gorge carved by the river. Towering stone walls rose on either side, draped in thin, vine-like growth. Occasionally, they heard distant roars or the guttural calls of unknown creatures. Each time, they would pause, hearts pounding, until silence resumed. As dusk began to paint the sky in shades of violet and gold, they found a narrow alcove in the canyon to make camp. A portable shield generator once again provided coverage, masking their heat signatures. Exhausted, they settled on the rocky ground. Ethan shared Terran rations while Howrick and Anil produced some Vaylen nutrient packs. Selara sat beside him, the orb resting on a soft cloth near her feet. She seemed weary, yet a determined spark lingered in her gaze. In the fading light, her horns gleamed softly, casting faint reflections across the canyon walls. You never told me what exactly the Heart of Valis can do, Ethan said quietly, breaking the stillness. Selara considered the glowing sphere. Legends say it holds knowledge, an imprint of an ancient mind, or perhaps many minds. It is said to reveal secrets of star travel and cosmic harmony. In times of strife, my ancestors believed it could unify the Vaylen under a single purpose, guiding us through darkness. Ethan leaned forward, intrigued. So it's not just a key, it's a repository of knowledge, maybe even wisdom? She nodded. Yes, and also a potential weapon if corrupted. The ancients believed it held the power to reshape worlds, if misused. He whistled softly, glancing around the shadowy canyon. No wonder the raiders want it. They could sell it, or worse, exploit it. Selara's expression darkened. That cannot be allowed. My people will protect it, and your alliance will gain a powerful friend if we succeed. Silence lingered between them, broken only by the gentle hum of the shield generator and the distant trickle of water. Then, in a softer voice, Selara added, I see now that humans are more than what I once believed. You, Captain Carter, have shown me that beneath your species' rough exterior lies bravery, loyalty, and an indomitable spirit. He felt his cheeks warm again at the unexpected compliment. Not all humans are saints, he admitted. But we try, and you've shown me that the Vaylen aren't just aloof. You have a depth of culture, tradition, and heart. She smiled, a delicate, almost shy expression that was entirely new on her regal features. I appreciate your words, Ethan. They shared a quiet moment, sitting side by side under the alien sky. Any barrier of species or rank seemed to ease for that fleeting instant, replaced by a simple, genuine companionship. Halric and Anil dozed nearby, trusting the shield to protect them. Eventually, Selara rose. We should rest. Tomorrow, we must continue. He nodded, watching her briefly as she moved to settle near the orb. Then he leaned against the canyon wall, eyes half-lidded, letting the lull of the planet's night sounds wash over him. They were close to the end of their mission, or so he hoped, but the path ahead remained fraught with danger. Still, for the first time, he felt certain they would make it through together. They woke to the gray light of early morning, the sun's pale rays scarcely penetrating the canyon depths. The shield generator's hum had become a comforting background noise. Selara checked on the artifact, which glowed softly in response to her presence. Halric and Anil prepared a simple breakfast of nutrient gel and water. Ethan stretched, rolling the stiffness from his shoulders. Next time, remind me to bring a proper bedroll, he joked, wincing at a crick in his neck. Selara raised an eyebrow, amusement tugging at her lips. Next time, indeed. But their moment of levity shattered abruptly. Without warning, a hail of plasma bolts slammed against the shield, sending ripples of energy crackling across the protective barrier. The group scrambled, hearts pounding. Ethan peered through the flickering shield at the canyon entrance, where a squad of raiders, perhaps a dozen strong, advanced with grim determination. One of them clutched a device that glowed with the same hue as the shield. A disruptor. Shut it down, the raider captain barked, and the device pulsed, destabilizing the shield's harmonic frequency. In seconds, the protective barrier collapsed in a shower of sparks. Selara grabbed the artifact, pressing it against her chest. We're exposed. Ethan cursed, snapping into battle mode. Halric, Anil, get to cover. Ambassador, stay down. Plasma bolts hissed overhead, scorching the canyon walls. The raiders pressed forward, some ducking behind boulders, others firing wildly. Quickly, Ethan returned fire. He took down one raider, then another, but they were outnumbered. Halric and Anil fought valiantly at his side, but the enemy's disruptor cut through their energy-based shields and threatened to overload their weapons. In the chaos, Selara clung to the orb, her horns flaring in agitation. The artifact pulsed, as if sensing her distress. Arcs of light flickered around her fingers, hinting at some latent power it might unleash. But the ambassador seemed torn, hesitant to risk unleashing an unknown force. A plasma bolt slammed near Ethan, spraying rock fragments. He staggered, ears ringing. Through the smoke, he saw the raiders fanning out, trying to encircle them. His mind raced. At this rate, they would be overrun. Suddenly, a brilliant pulse of energy erupted from Selara. The artifact flared with searing brightness, momentarily blinding friend and foe alike. The canyon filled with a resonant hum, shaking the ground. Ethan felt the hair on his arms stand on end, as though an electric charge lanced through the air. When the light faded, the raiders had been thrown back, strewn across the ground in dazed heaps. Their disruptor crackled with sparks, destroyed by the artifact's burst of energy. Silence fell, broken only by the muffled groans of the scattered raiders. Selara gasped, nearly dropping the orb. Halric rushed to her side, supporting her. Ethan shook off the disorientation and hurried to secure the nearest raider. He confiscated their weapons, tossing them out of reach. "What was that?" he panted, turning to Selara with wide eyes. She steadied herself, cradling the Heart of Valis like a living thing. "The artifact responded to my desperation," she whispered, horns dimming. "I did not know it could do that." Halric stepped in, his gaze flicking between her and the orb. "You may have tapped into its defensive powers, Ambassador. A reflection of your intent to protect rather than to destroy." Enil gave a shaky nod. "Whatever it was, it saved us." Ethan scanned the raiders, confirming they were stunned but alive. "We should move. There could be more on the way." With swift efficiency, they gathered their belongings and slipped away, leaving the disabled raiders behind. Selara walked as if in a trance, her grip on the artifact firm, though her face was etched with worry at the power she had just unleashed. Ethan pressed a comforting hand to her shoulder. "Thank you," he said softly. "That blast might have saved all our lives." She regarded him with uncertain eyes. "I only hope it does not presage something darker. The artifact's abilities may be unpredictable, even to me." They pressed on, ascending the canyon walls and heading back in the general direction of their landing site. The morning sun climbed higher, painting the sky in a hazy ochre. Tension simmered among them, each wondering if they would be attacked again, if the planet itself would betray them with further anomalies, or if the artifact would spark another surge of energy. Yet as they moved, a subtle sense of unity prevailed. They were no longer just a Terran pilot and a haughty Vaylen ambassador with aides. They were comrades bound by shared danger, supporting one another on a world that seemed intent on testing their resolve. Through skill, caution, and some luck, they managed to evade further raider patrols. Using the drone's limited battery for overhead reconnaissance, they navigated shifting landscapes, skirting areas where gravitational anomalies turned the ground into swirling quagmires. The journey was long and draining, but at last, in the late afternoon, they saw the familiar shape of the Solaris Dawn perched on the distant plateau. Relief coursed through them, but it was short-lived. Through the drone's feed, Ethan saw a small group of raiders near the ship, attempting to breach its hull with heavy mining lasers. Smoke rose from the scorched plating. "Damn it," Ethan growled. "They must have tracked the ship's coordinates. If they break in, they could steal it." Solara's horns flared with irritation. "We must stop them, or we lose our only means of off-world escape." Halric grimaced. "They outnumber us yet again." Ethan keyed in commands on his wrist device, setting the drone on a remote sabotage course. "I'll distract them with the drone, buy us time to close in. When we get close enough, we hit them hard and fast." Selara cradled the artifact, concern lining her face. "We cannot risk damaging the ship," she cautioned. He nodded. "Agreed. Let's do this carefully." They advanced cautiously, staying low behind rocky outcroppings. The raiders at the ship's hull were intent on their laser work, oblivious to the approaching group. Moments later, the drone buzzed overhead, dropping a small flash charge that exploded in a burst of light. The startled raiders stumbled, covering their eyes. Ethan seized the opportunity, firing a volley of stun shots. Selara, Halric, and Enil joined in, each blast aimed with practiced precision. Half the raiders fell immediately. The others whirled, returning fire in a chaotic scramble. One raider managed to snap off a shot that slammed into the ground near Ethan's feet, sending him sprawling. His ears rang, dust filling his mouth. Another shot grazed Enil's arm, causing her to cry out in pain. But Selara, fear and anger blazing, unleashed another surge from the orb, less dramatic than before, but enough to knock the raider off his feet. Finally, the skirmish ended. The raiders lay subdued around the Solaris Dawn, their makeshift equipment scattered across the plateau. Ethan pressed a hand to his bruised ribs, helping Enil stand. Selara hurried to them, worry etched across her features. Are you both all right? Ethan coughed, nodding. I'll live. Enil. She winced, but managed a small smile. Just a burn. I'll be fine. Howrick deactivated the raiders' laser drills, tossing them aside. That should be the last of them for now. Ethan breathed a sigh of relief, carefully tapping commands into his wrist device to open the Solaris Dawn's hatch. Let's get inside before more show up. They filed into the ship, the familiar hum of life support instantly comforting. Ethan ran a quick systems check, wincing at the hull damage. Engines still look good. We might have a shaky takeoff, but we can manage. Selara set the Heart of Valis gently on a padded table in the cargo area. Howrick tended to Enil's burn, applying a salve from the Vaylen medkit. Ethan moved to the cockpit, booting up the thrusters. The engines rumbled in protest, but soon the console lights glowed in readiness. Selara joined him, standing behind his chair. Can we lift off in this condition? He nodded, checking readouts. I can push it. The hull damage is superficial. The bigger issue is the gravitational flux. We'll have to time our launch carefully, or we might get slammed back to the ground. She exhaled. I trust you. Those words, so simple yet brimming with significance, made Ethan pause. He glanced back at her, meeting her gaze. There was warmth there, a bond forged in trial and fear. He smiled softly, turning back to the controls. Then let's go home. The Solaris Dawn rose from the plateau in a swirl of dust, engines roaring against the planet's unpredictable gravity. Ethan's hands danced over the controls, compensating for turbulence that threatened to slam them back to the surface. Selara gripped the back of his chair, her horns glowing in tense anticipation. As they ascended, the storms returned, lightning lashing across the skies. The ship's shields flickered with each strike. Ethan gritted his teeth, guiding them through the swirling clouds. Another bolt sizzled by, narrowly missing a wing. A siren wailed as the gravitational anomaly spiked, making the sensors go haywire. Somewhere behind him, Enil prayed softly, while Howrick checked on the artifact. Selara maintained her poised stance, though Ethan could sense her concern. With one final burst of thrusters, they broke through the thick cloud layer and emerged into the calm of the upper atmosphere. The weight of the planet's chaotic energies fell away, replaced by the serene infinity of space. A collective exhalation filled the cockpit. For a moment, they simply floated there, savoring the triumph of having escaped the planet's clutches. Ethan began charting a course for Starbase Orion, feeling a profound sense of relief. The mission was nearly complete. Selara gently set a hand on his shoulder. Captain Carter, she said quietly. Ethan, you have done more than your duty. You have risked your life for this artifact, for me, for the good of both our peoples. I am grateful. He turned, smiling, the tension in his body dissolving. We did this together, Ambassador, he replied, voice tender. And if it means better relations between humans and Vaylen, then it's worth all the bruises. She chuckled lightly, stepping aside as Howrick and Enil emerged. Howrick spoke formally, our thanks as well, Captain. You have proven that alliances are not forged solely through treaties, but through shared hardships. Ethan dipped his head, touched by the sentiment. Let's get you and your artifact back home safely. Then we can talk about forging all the alliances you want. With renewed confidence, he engaged the warp drive. Space shimmered once again, the stars stretching into luminal streaks. The hum of the engines lulled them into a weary calm. Soon, Starbase Orion rose in the distance, a bright beacon amidst the cosmic darkness. They docked without incident, welcomed by a flurry of excitement. Admiral Greaves himself stood in the hangar, a rare smile on his face as Selara, Howrick, and Enil disembarked, artifact in hand. Terran and Vaylen representatives waited with hushed curiosity, eager to witness the retrieval of the fabled Heart of Valis. Ethan hung back slightly, letting Selara have the spotlight. He watched as she presented the orb, carefully explaining how the mission had unfolded. The gathered officials murmured in awe, aware that they stood on the brink of a new era in Vaylen-Terran cooperation. Admiral Greaves approached Ethan, offering a brisk salute. Well done, Captain. You've secured not just an artifact, but also our alliance with the Vaylen. I trust the mission was eventful? Ethan stifled a grin. You have no idea, sir. Meanwhile, Selara concluded her formal report, then crossed the hangar to where Ethan stood. She offered him a delicate bow, a gesture of profound respect in Vaylen culture. Captain Carter, the Vaylen shall not forget your bravery. nor your compassion. You have my personal thanks." He dipped his head in return. "I'm just glad we all made it back in one piece." A spark flickered in her eyes. Humans have indeed proven worthy. I look forward to many further collaborations. She paused, horns reflecting a faint, warm glow. Perhaps, even, some that are more personal in nature? Ethan's heart gave a small leap. "I'd like that," he said softly. "After all, we have quite a story to tell." A subtle smile curved her lips, an unspoken understanding that their bond transcended the boundaries of species and rank. As dignitaries closed in around them, eager for details of their adventure, Ethan found himself sharing a private grin with the once distant ambassador. Their story was no longer just a mission report, it was living history, weaving the fates of two cultures together. In the days that followed, the Heart of Valis was carefully analyzed and stabilized. True to legend, it contained vast historical archives that illuminated lost chapters of Vaylen history and offered intriguing clues for joint research into advanced technologies. Diplomatic talks between Terrans and Vaylen accelerated, culminating in treaties that fostered cooperation across many star systems. Selara became a crucial figure in these negotiations, hailed for her role in retrieving the artifact and forging new bonds. Yet amid the bustle of statecraft, she often made time to slip away to the flight decks, where Ethan Carter busied himself with maintenance checks and training flights. There, away from prying eyes, they shared quiet conversations, half-smiles, and the occasional gloved touch of hands that hinted at something deeper. Reyes teased Ethan incessantly about his new Vaylen admirer, but he did so with genuine warmth. The station staff, once wary of alien visitors, softened their attitudes upon seeing Selara converse easily with Terran pilots and technicians. The sense of mutual respect grew, nurtured by the seeds of trust the pair had sown together. Eventually, the time came for Selara to return to Vaylen space, the Heart of Valis under secure guard. She stood by the docking ramp of a Vaylen cruiser, horns gleaming in the station's artificial light, bidding farewell to the Terran officials who had gathered to see her off. When at last she reached Ethan, she paused, a faint tremor in her voice as she spoke. "I owe you much, Captain. And this is only farewell for now. I will be back. My people have invited you to Vaylen Prime, to share in the knowledge we have uncovered." He nodded, trying to keep his composure. "I'll look forward to it. Take care, Ambassador." She hesitated, then leaned close, whispering so only he could hear. "You have already proven much to me, but I suspect you will continue surprising us all. Until we meet again, Ethan Carter." With that, she stepped aboard her vessel. Moments later, the docking port sealed, and the cruiser pulled away, disappearing into the stars. Ethan watched it vanish with a mix of pride and longing. He turned to find Admiral Greaves observing him with a half-smile. "Seems you made quite the impression, Carter." Ethan shrugged lightly, hands tucked in his pockets. "You know me, sir. I'm always up for bridging gaps. One flight at a time." The Admiral laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Well, I suspect this is just the beginning of a long, fruitful partnership." And so it was. From that day onward, the bond between humans and Vaylen only grew stronger, guided by the epic retrieval of the Heart of Valis, and by the unlikely pair who shattered cultural prejudices in the heat of danger. Where once Selara Va'reth regarded humans as inferior, she now carried within her heart a respect and admiration for the species she had once dismissed. And for Ethan Carter, the cocky Terran pilot with a knack for trouble, one look from Selara had changed his universe forever, showing him that courage and devotion could transcend all barriers, even those inscribed by the stars themselves. A bright future awaited them both, bound by shared trials, abiding respect, and the promise of new horizons.